This date, I'm joined by Rafael Perez-Escamilla, professor and director at the Yale School of Public Health. Professor, according to the WHO, new cases are still going up around the world from the previous week. Deaths are down, but 6 months later, what do you consider the biggest lesson from this pandemic?
The biggest lesson is that the pandemic continues to be very, very active, and that we cannot put our guard down, because we have seen in location after location that when that happens, there is a spike immediately, and then we have to go back to at least a partial lockdown. Until we have a vaccine in place that is safe and effective, we cannot assume that essentially the virus is going to go away by magic.
And it seems that there is a playbook of successfully controlling infections, but each country around the world handles it their own way. You mentioned a vaccine. Do you think the pandemic will ever end despite a potential vaccine if there are still COVID-prone countries or regions that remain?
So for the pandemic to be brought under control, it's not only having a vaccine available, but it is also to massively and effectively distribute it to all countries in the world, and with a high degree of coverage and compliance from the population. Because if we don't do it, all of us together, all the countries together, as long as hotspots remain anywhere in the world, there is always a big chance that it will start coming back in places in the world where apparently it would seem to be under control. So this is why it's so crucial for all countries to rally around the leadership of the World Health Organization to make sure that the hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dosages that are going to be needed to be distributed in a very short period of time can be done in an effective way.
Now, the virus, according to the WHO, is spreading most rapidly right now in Southeast Asia. You mentioned Europe. There are some spikes there, but the Americas especially hard hit, with Brazil and Peru. What do they all have in common? And at this point, 6 months in, what do you see as the most troubling trend among these regions?
So the most troubling trend is really the irresponsibility of leaders like President Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil, who actually downplayed and practically ignored the major threat that this virus posed to the public health of his country. And we see the results. We see the enormous number of unnecessary morbidity and mortality that has happened in Brazil as a result. So in many instances in these countries, the pandemic arrived later than, of course, China and Europe and the US. And I think that some politicians became overconfident that for some reasons their countries would not be as affected. But we have seen that we cannot put our guard down anywhere in the world, because this virus eventually is going to catch up everywhere where we're not complying with the effective public health measures that we know work.